JSB Trails. Welcome to JSB Trails, a beacon from the past, lighting the future.
Welcome back to another edition of JSB Trails, a beacon from the past, lighting the future. And today, folks, we have somebody that, if you have listened to our interviews, this gentleman's name has been called in every single interview that I have done. And he is none other than Mr. Arvel Grant. A pleasant good day to you, sir.
How are you doing? pleasant good evening and day to you and your listeners. It's a pleasure.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me. As I said before, for all the interviews that I've done, your name has been mentioned, and we're gonna quiz you on some of the...
I'm ready
right.
to run along with you on the trail.
All right, let's go. So, firstly, where were you born? Let's focus a little bit on you first. Where were you born?
Well, I was born in Jamaica in a little hospital in southern Jamaica, and I grew up for the very formative years of my life. I grew up in rural Jamaica and attended a primary school in the hills of rural Jamaica, and then at about age 12, I went to the school for the blind in Kingston.
What was the issue with your eyes?
I was born with something called corneal opacity, and it came about because at the time when I was conceived, the vaccinations for rubella were not widely available in rural Jamaica, and so my mother was not vaccinated against that German measles thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I came off rather luckily, because I could have caught the worst end of it, which would have been major mental retardation or major hearing impairment. I think I got the visual impairment and mild hearing impairment, and I consider myself remarkably blessed, extremely lucky. They say a miss is as good as a mile. I think my miss is as good as about 1,000 miles, because it really hasn't affected me. I've been able to get on with my life. I'm a proud alumni of the University of the West Indies. I've been in and out of that place at least 5 times, I think. I've gone through certificates in family life, family planning, certificates in social psychology, an undergraduate certificate in social work, Bachelor of Science in social work, postgraduate diploma in public administration, Master of Public Health, and I've done at UWI many other courses, including an incomplete postgraduate diploma in psychology. So that, for me, this interference at birth has really been a nuisance in the bush, if anything.
Right. So let me clear up something here. Is it that it made you totally blind or visually impaired?
It allowed me to see light and contrast, and if you learn to use that very well,
right,
you see what looks like a dark spot in a building. You make the assumption it's a doorway.
It's a door, right.
Yeah, and you try and head towards it and approach it cautiously, and more times than not, it is the door. So you kind of, if you're born that way, you work out very quickly as a child how to manage contrast and to interpret them as safe or unsafe. So if you're walking along on the sidewalk and you see a dark patch, it could be an open manhole, but it could also be a pool of water.
Right.
Or it may be somebody doing some work there and splash some paint there, but you don't really want to discover what it is. You go around it.
And childhood for you, were you attending the normal primary?
Oh yeah. I went to a normal basic school.
Mm-hmm.
Well, before I even got to basic school, my mother, using that little vision that I had, taught me to write the letters of the alphabet in the soil.
Whoa.
We had a patch of open area between our outdoor kitchen back then and the back entrance to the house. And she used that, and that's where I learned to write big letters of the alphabet using the English alphabet.
That's creative.
So I could write and spell and do those things before I went to school at 4 or 5. So she taught me to write those things at 3 and 4. And by the time I went there at the entrance of my 5th year, I had a good sense of those things. So even though I didn't write much in school, either at primary school or in basic school, I followed the lessons very, very well. And it turned out very nicely. I'm very proud of that woman because she made me the man I am, because her mantra and my father's mantra has always been, even if you don't have hands and feet, if you have a good brain in your head, you will get along. And they're so damn right, I'm proud of them.
That's true. That is very true. And now tell me a little bit about life at the Salvation Army School for the Blind.
Well, that was interesting. The first part of it is that I actually, in the beginning, I hated it. I ran away. I tried to get away 3 times.
Oh, geez. As in run away?
Yeah. I left the compound, and the first 2 times I was stupid enough to leave in my school uniform. In those days, the junior classes wore khaki trousers, I think blue shirts, blue t-shirts. And after I wandered a few blocks trying to find West Street to try and board the bus to head to southern Jamaica,
right.
Somebody, on both occasions, they just took me back. I didn't resist. Every time they caught me and took me back, and luckily they would leave me at the gate and I would just walk in, and nobody apprehended me or anything. The third time, I worked out that my uniform was the thing. So I tried to get away on Saturday. Right after breakfast, I wandered around the main building, down a slight road a few times, went to the gate, walked back, and then nobody called to me. So I went to the gate a third time and walked out. And this time I got very far. I got all the way down to what I know now to be Orange Street. But I couldn't work out how to get to West Street. And evening started to come down, and I asked somebody to tell me how to get back to Slipe Pen Road to the school for the blind, and they actually walked me almost back to school. After that, I gave up. My parents had a nice way of having people come to visit me. They came, they had a man who was the side man on one of those buses, and they sent him to look for us. He came almost once a month. And after a while, you began to look forward to those visits. The then secretary of the parish council, Mr. Clark, he also came to look for me and my brother and sister quite frequently, examined us. So he always came right in front of the Wixes. He would lift up my shirt, look at my back, ask me if anybody's beating you, anybody's injuring you, or anybody touching you in any place where you're uncomfortable. Nobody trying to touch your buttocks, touch your he never said penis, he said your body. And I'd say no. And he did that right in front of the management.
Right.
So after a while, because of those visits, my mother came, my father came. Because of those visits, you kind of settled into a rhythm. And then I discovered the girls. We lived on one side, and the girls lived on one side.
Oh yes.
And they, in the evenings and in the morning when they came into the classroom, they smelled so nice and fresh.
Yes.
Clean, and in the evenings when they come up to the front after supper, again, you look forward to the civilization that they brought to the place. They weren't as loud and bellicose as us boys. And once you discovered them, then life became very, very, very good.
Right. At what age did you leave the Salvation Army School for the Blind, and what did you pursue after? One
of the very interesting things about my journeys at the school was that they built a new school at Manning's Hill.
Right.
And they moved. When they were moving, they asked some of us older boys to stay back at school that summer. I think it was a summer, and we to help load the trucks, upload the the furnishings to the truck and download them when we got to Manning Hill. So I thoroughly enjoyed that summer. I rode on a truck. I rode on a truck once when I was a child. But at 18, I got to ride on trucks every day for days, and that was lovely.
Yeah.
So all of the heavy lifting, all those beds, those bunk beds, all of the beds, the tables in the dining room, the equipment over at Mr. Jones's workshop, the desk and chairs. We, the boys at that time, did the heavy lifting and helped move the school. And I really enjoyed that. I was about 18. And then they allowed a few of us to live at the back of the new school in transition. We used to call it Peckham. We lived at Peckham.
Yes, I know there.
you know Peckham, right?
Yes.
Oh yeah. So we lived at Peckham. Enjoyed it because it was easier.
Right.
At Slide Pen Road, we had dug a hole under the fence in behind the dormitory. I don't know if it's dormitory 3 or whatever it was. And so we used to get our way out at nights, on Friday nights, and Saturday nights, and go down to where the sound systems were playing in West Kingston, and drink some rum, and then we would crawl back in before it got too early in the morning. And but when we went to Peckham, it was a little easier because all we had to do, we got a little help in producing a way of getting past the lock. So it was easier to get out, and we were men now anyway, so we could also go through the front. So life at Peckham was very nice.
Right.
And there was a little bit more freedom because, as I say, we could exit and entrance as we liked.
Right.
And I thoroughly enjoyed that. And it was when I was at Peckham that I thought I wanted to become a priest. And so I began the journey of trying to read the Holy Bible as often as I could. I read it 3 times, and then I started skipping on the 4th and 5th time, skipping those books that were I thought were repetitious, and there are quite a bit of repetition in both the Old and New Testaments.
Right.
And then I got to a point in that journey where I decided I didn't want to be a priest anymore.
Whoa.
And so I became a very secular person. I really, I saw church and worship as more social and sociological experiences. Still enjoy going, but I go now because I enjoy the fellowship rather than looking forward to going to heaven or hell.
In terms of life after school now, what did you pursue?
Well, I got trained as a switchboard operator. So that's what I did. I worked in all kinds of places, actually. I got my certificate and I just bothered the Services Commission people. Every week I went there. I didn't call. I just went every Friday.
Right.
And asked for Mr. Madden or Miss Phillips. And asked them if they found anything for me. And I think after a while, after about 6 Fridays, they decided it was easier for them. Anytime an acting position came up, they just assigned me. So I worked at the Services Commissions. I worked at the Immigration Office. I worked at Jubilee Hospital. I worked at Government Printing Office. I worked in all kinds of places acting for people who are going on leave. Because I think in their heads, they just, I'm always going to come on a Friday anyway. Even though they tell me they'll call me, I went.
Right.
I never waited on them to call me. And then after a while, I got a call from a man, I think he was Mr. Thompson, at the office of the Prime Minister, and he told me that I needed to report to work at the office of the Prime Minister on the following Monday. That must have been about a Thursday.
Wow.
So I went out and bought myself some new shirts and trousers and 2 new pairs of shoes and showed up at the office of the Prime Minister. And that, believe me, that assignment changed my life completely for many reasons, because you heard about people on the news, but you got to meet them. You get to talk with them. You get to hear them angry. You get to hear them laughing. You get to hear them flirting with the women in the office. And all of a sudden you say, oh, but these guys are just like us. They love women. They're normal. They're greedy. They love food. They stuff like that. Then I met the former Prime Minister, the late Michael Manley.
Right.
He used to work late in the evenings. And we became a bit of a friend, not close friends, but he always stopped by my workstation when he's leaving.
Mm-hmm.
When he's going in his office, he's brisk and with all of the bodyguards and so on.
Right.
But then they leave him in his office and secure the doors. And when he's leaving at night, he would stop by my workstation and we'll chat a little bit about cricket, about how he's planning to expand the office. And he would ask me, for example, what I thought about. I think somebody from Panama had given the Prime Minister a nice big car, and he said if I heard people talking about the car, and I said, yeah, I heard you got a very nice car from the President of Panama. And he said, yeah, but I will never ride in that thing. They think I'm a fool, right? Why would I ride in a car that the Americans may have bugged 1,000 times, right? And I said, Prime Minister, I think that makes a lot of sense. But we became good friends. And to cut the story short, he asked me one day what I wanted to do with my life, because he can't imagine me answering and dispatching calls for much longer, because I have what he called a good set of gray matter between my temples.
Right.
And I told him I wanted to go to the university. And he said, oh, well, you should go to the university. I completely forgot about that conversation for months. Mm-hmm. And then the permanent secretary, a fellow named Gordon Wells, I hope he's still alive and well. He came to me one afternoon and asked whether I have submitted the application form for study leave as yet. And I told him, no, I wasn't aware of that. And he said, well, you weren't aware of it, and left. Mm-hmm. And then the next week, the whole personnel department descended on me.
All right.
And before you knew it, I was informed that if I got into the university, then I would get study leave. And I got into the university with some fight, because they didn't want to admit me. They said they don't cater for blind students and all of that rubbish.
Right.
But I got into that place with the help of a woman called June Dolly Besson. A very wonderful woman from Trinidad. One day I'll tell you the story about her. But anyhow, I got in and I got my leave and I went off to the University of the West Indies. And the rest is history.
And what did you study at the outset at the university?
Well, privately, before I even got there, I did things in family life education and social psychology.
Right.
But when I applied for law or social work. I didn't have the qualifications to get into the faculty of law. Eventually, I got myself admitted to social work. And I did that, graduated with honors, and then that launched me into other areas, including postgraduate diploma in public administration. And eventually, I specialized in public health, and my public health specialization has guided much of my work around the world. And
let's go now to this area. How did you now get involved with the Jamaica Society for the Blind?
Well, that is another very interesting tale, because I heard about the Society for the Blind a fair bit when I was at the School for the Blind. I heard about it because I believe they did something in the beginning they had something to do with getting people to might have had something to do with craft, might have had something to do with getting people placed in some employment. Mm-hmm. But the thing that I learned about them most powerfully about was that they distributed eye drops to people around the country.
Okay.
And I remember them as a child, because I was diagnosed with glaucoma as a child at KPH. And my eye drops used to come to me in the mountains of southern Jamaica every single month by post, sent by KPH and the Jamaica Society for the Blind. So I knew of them as a child. And when I left school, you have to remember that when I left school in the 70s, Jamaica was in the grips of progressive politics.
Right.
Michael Manley and the People's National Party promoted democratic socialism as the development model for Jamaica. And we formed something called the Progressive Blind Association as part of that wider development paradigm. And when we formed that thing, one of the unspoken but very well intended intention was to disestablish the leadership at the Jamaica Society for the Blind, because we thought they weren't doing much to help people who are actually blind, and especially younger blind people who left the school and were floundering around the place pretty much on their own, trying to get opportunities created. And so the paradigm of democratic socialism created a vehicle for us called the Progressive Blind Association. People like Herbie Honeygan and Derek Palmer, Jeffrey Latty. There's a guy named Arvel Grant who was a very active part of it as well. And we kind of used that to terrorize the JSB, really.
Right.
And I say that guardedly, because we didn't use guns and bombs, but we used the media and we used our access to ministers in high places to point out everything wrong that they were doing. They were doing some good things, but we were budding politicians, and so we kind of knew that what we really should do is emphasize the fact that at that time they had a board which said that only one person who was blind could sit on the board. And we thought the reverse should be true. Only one person who was sighted should be on the board. So we took that, blew it up, met with the permanent secretary in Social Security, met with the minister. We formed a very great bond with the wife of the then Minister of Health, a wonderful woman called Mrs. Peart. She became our driver, our eyes, our advisor, and helped us gain access to the various highest levels in the Ministry of Social Security. And we used that as a sledgehammer to beat the then leadership of the Jamaica Society for the Blind into submission. And they submitted. We got the ministry to threaten them that if they didn't open up the board to more blind people, then they would cut off their subvention. And that scared the dung out of them, because we went to a general meeting and the board pretty much resigned en bloc and left the society to us blind people, excepting for one man, a very distinguished and wonderful, humane Jamaican called Carl James, Rogic James.
Yes.
He stood with us. He said that we were ragtag and we were rude to the people and we treated them badly, but he's not abandoning us. He stayed with us. He used to drive a lovely Mercedes Benz. He would carry us in it when we needed to go somewhere and he was free. And eventually, because of him and because of his friends in the Lions Club, we met a guy called Casey Williams. And Casey Williams became a kind of father figure for us. He's the kind of guy who would say, look, man, if you're going to come to these meetings, then you have to wear clean shoes. You know? And he kind of looked out for us. And those kinds of human beings created a situation where when it became too dangerous for the Jamaica Society for the Blind to exist at 8 Central Avenue, we were able to sell that building. I believe we may have sold it for about $42,000. And some of us used our life insurance policies to borrow the difference, which is about $20,000, to buy the existing property. I believe we bought that existing property for $50,000. But the great story about that is that we got the church that was next door, the Jamaica Society for the Blind building downtown, to buy the building. We sinned. We committed a grave sin, actually. Because we met with the bishop and told him, which was partially true, it has come to our attention that some people were planning to buy our offices to use as a nightclub. Now, it did come to our attention, but it came to our attention by the speculative imagination of one of our members who said, it would be a terrible thing.
Why do I feel like that is Mr. Derek Palmer?
No, it was a guy named Arvel Grant who said it would be a terrible thing.
Right.
If somebody bought this, if we sold this building to some people who use it as a whorehouse or a nightclub, right next door to the church. So that became the theme of our message when we asked the bishop to meet with us.
Mhm.
We didn't tell him how it came to our attention, but we told him that it came to our attention, which is the truth.
Right.
And he said, no. God would not allow something like that to happen to his people.
Mhm.
And he and the members will do everything in their powers to mobilize the resources to buy the property. And I can only tell you that we were delighted. And then that process led to what we now have at Old Hope Road, which is perhaps one of the finest pieces of investment anybody in Kingston would have made, because I imagine it's probably well worth the better part of $100 million now.
That
But
is
we
true.
bought it then. We bought it then with courage and character,
Right.
and with some of us putting our life insurance up there to guarantee it. I think we bought it for $50,000.
And we, the current staff and the clients, we really would like to thank you guys for really investing in us.
But that's what we do. I really don't know if we deserve too much thanks. If you decide to get involved to help in some way, you put your best foot forward.
That is true.
If the opportunity presents itself again, and I certainly see a way of getting JSB to do something like that and get more out of it, I would throw in everything I have and give it my best shot. So I hear the thanks, but we kind of do it because we think it's the right thing to do. When we went into that building for the first time, bush was growing in almost all of the rooms. Because the people who bought it ran away. I think they left the country years before. But because it was so well built and so secure with those wrought iron window grills and so on, people didn't really break into it and vandalize it. So we had to then clear out all of the bush that was growing between the tiles and all kinds of, but once we cleared it out, and with the help of the St. Andrew Lions Club, refurbished it, it became a very nice and very secure place. And so I've had the privilege of working or intervening directly in the better part of 80 countries. So that, for me, JSB is one small step, very, very small speck in what we have been able to do, whether it's in Africa or on the Indian subcontinent, or in the United Kingdom or Europe, Germany especially, Canada, the United States, all of the Caribbean, much of parts of Latin America. So if I gave this interview to people in many countries, there would be things that we would talk about that would be similar. I mean, we went to one country that shall remain nameless to discover that the former police commissioner was the chairman, and that he was busily plundering the organization millions of a certain currency.
Right.
And we had to intervene with the deputy governor in that place to take him down. And it was no mean task. This is why I tend to, as I say, what we got done at JSB, we got done because we went into it with the courage and character of brave men.
Right.
Unfortunately, at the time, we were in the very early stages, we were only men, and we took some cussing from people for it, because we weren't particularly courteous to people. We were brash, we were loud, we took on people, we went into meetings and shout down permanent secretaries and treated people a little bit rough. And as we went along life's journey, we discovered that those weren't always the best tactics. So now I think if you meet most of us anywhere, we are far more refined, civilized human beings.
Right. So now you have cleaned up the building and get everything in order. How did you guys move forward? Because I don't know if any of you had any training in how to run an organization like that. Mr. James and his friends at the Lions Club helped you.
Well, you see, what really happened, is that while that was happening, I was badgering the Services Commission to get a job, and when I finally got a job, I ended up in the good graces of the establishment at the office of the Prime Minister. And so before you knew it, within a few short years, I had a good degree with a lot of management training in it. And so as one of the previous executive directors, I was able to apply that in pivoting the thing to another level. So I got in there, and one of the things we did, we made sure that we had regular meetings with the people at the Services Commissions to try and push them to make sure the jobs were created. Even before we got there, we had something called the Combined Disabilities Association with a guy named Huntley Forrester, another guy named Tony Wang, two wheelchair fellows.
Right.
And another fellow, I can't remember his name, but he used to run a sound system from his wheelchair called Ironside.
Wow.
But those guys, along with myself and Derek, and I believe Herbie, and a guy named Katie Edwards, another guy in a wheelchair, and Nella Webb, we fashioned something called the Combined Disabilities Association. And with that thing, we were able to drive a whole range of development, not only for persons who are blind,
Right.
but for persons with other disabilities. I might tell you something though. When we got a chance in the late 70s to have a formal audience with former Prime Minister Michael Manley,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a conversation with him about how to make housing available for people with disabilities.
Right.
And the meeting wasn't long. I think he had a guy in the meeting. I won't call his name now, but he was in the meeting and he said to him, I think we can do this. Give me that envelope that you have there. And he took the envelope and he wrote out what he said should be the amendment to the existing Housing Trust Act, which would then create easier access for people who have disabilities to get housing. And before we knew it, this amendment took place because when I left university a few years later, I applied to the Housing Trust and got a nice third floor flat and paid off for it. I think I still own it.
Yeah.
The thing is, what we really have to work for and push for is for JSB to continuously push the system to put structures in place that help people who are blind the way those structures help everybody else. So whether it is housing or it is making sure that there's constant engagement with the Services Commission and the Ministry of the Public Service,
Right.
whether it is pushing hard to make sure that something we discussed quite recently in another forum, the police stations have text boards so that hearing impaired and blind people can text them if they can't call them, whether getting companies to do the same thing, pushing the banks to make sure that the teller machines have good speech in them, and earphone receivers. Anything that everybody else in society has access to. Our task is to push the system to give those same access to people who are blind or who have other special needs. That's what drove us, and I'm hoping that that's what drives the present process.
Definitely it is. And at the outset, what were some of the programs that you guys implemented to help blind and visually impaired persons?
Well, we kind of felt around that a little bit, but the key thing, we wanted to make sure that people had access to independent mobility skills.
Right.
One of a kind of tangential development which gave us a boost was that the United States at the time assigned as head of the Peace Corps a man who was blind, a guy named Don Galloway. And Don Galloway was an inspiration to a lot of us because he was very independent. He had his own driver. He was very good with his white cane skills. He had a very commanding presence. Some people have presence.
Yes.
They arrive in a room and they suck up the energies in the room. And Don was one of those guys. And he kind of got it through to us by example that the key really was for people to move around independently. And so that became part of the thrust, getting people who would be using informal training programs. We had a guy, a reverend, can't remember his name now, but he was assigned to Jamaica to lead the establishment or to support the development of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. He was a U.S. citizen, but he brought something with him. He brought a skill. In his earlier life, he was an orientation and mobility specialist. And so he helped us by running some short informal training programs for people who wanted to help people to get along. And in a very embryonic way, he drove that as part of our system. And then we evolved to more sophisticated training programs with the help of CCB and the Royal College Society for the Blind and the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. I remember CNIB helped us establish a radio control system that we use to drive and command and control activities on the road, including activities of some of our rehabilitation officers.
Right.
We used to call them that those days. And then we got to that place where it became the norm to have rehabilitation officers. It became the norm to have skills training activities. And so we got also to that point where we established a clinic at the Jamaica Society for the Blind. And that clinic has expanded over the years. And now you have quite a modern clinic facility on the compound standing in its own building. But that concept came about really even before the 80s. There was some attempt at when we were down at Central Avenue, but it really crystallized when we got up to the Jamaica Society for the Blind. A guy named Hugh Vaughan, an ophthalmologist, gave us a lot of his time once a week to do that, and all of that grew into what we have now.
Whoa, that's a whole lot. That's a whole lot. And for you moved on after a while from before I go there, you said you were once one of the executive directors, right?
Yes. I think I came in 1980. When I left university, I took a job as an officer at the Ministry of Social Security, right across the road from the park. What that park where National Heroes Park, and I was there for a while. I was there for some months, but the bureaucracy almost drove me crazy because I'm really a man of action.
Right.
I'm afraid of going to meetings every week and nothing happening. And after a while, I told my supervisor, I won't call the lady's name, but she was the personal officer. I went to see her one day and I said, I'm leaving. I don't think I can handle this thing. It's going to drive me mad.
Mm-hmm.
She said, no, you can't leave like that. You have to resign. And I said, well, my lady, not my lady, some other phrase, I think you have to resign for me because I'm gone. And I didn't go back.
Whoa.
I had this idea that I was going to go into rural Jamaica, go on my family's small farm and become a real world-class farmer in Jamaica. But somehow I ended up at the Jamaica Society for the Blind. I think I told that story, my intention, to a guy named John Wilson from Sight Savers. And he said, no, you're not a farmer yet. Maybe later, but not a farmer yet. And we ended up with an arrangement where I became not only the executive director of JSB, but I became the assistant executive director of CCB with the responsibility for the Northwestern Caribbean. And so I ran the JSB, but I also developed programs in Haiti, in Belize, Cayman Islands, the Bahamas, all the way down to Bermuda. Wow. And of course, the United States.
And which year was this? Did you become the executive director?
I think it's 1981.
Right.
About 81 or thereabouts.
Mm-hmm. And how long did you serve at that level?
Oh, maybe 3 or 4 years. I took a job to run a program for the entire Caribbean down into Belize and Ghana in 85, 86. But before that, we developed a fundraiser called the Mediathon. The Jamaica Society for the Blind was the first organization in Jamaica to have a mediathon. Everybody had a telethon, but we didn't want a telethon. We wanted a mediathon where people listen to the thing on radio. And so we developed that, and I also invented something called Sound for Sight. We ran Sound for Sight and the mediathon together as brother and sister. And then I left that in 85 or 86 and went to Antigua.
And even after leaving the Jamaica Society for the Blind, I am sure that you still contributed and helped out the society over the years. Can you tell me?
My colleagues are always suspicious that I'm treating Jamaica Society for the Blind as though it is the Caribbean Council for the Blind. But that's never true. But it is always a standing accusation.
Right.
But I make no apologies for the fact that Jamaica, having had 40% of all of the people who are blind in the Caribbean, deserves the lion's share of the development assistance available to the Caribbean. And so I've always tried to make that argument, and sometimes I succeed. We found creative ways, lawful and creative ways of doing wonderful favors for JSB.
And what would you like to say now to the JSB and the strides that it has made over the years? I'm sure you're still in touch and you know of the strides that we are making.
Oh yeah, no, we've remained engaged with the JSB when it's in its difficult times. We come in and do our thing. The last time we had a big intervention, we had to do a forensic audit of the society and enforce certain very strong recommendations. And I'm happy to see that the JSB has really moved on from that very nicely. There were some dark days, and they've come out of it very nicely and are striding ahead very nicely. One of the things that JSB has to recognize now is that going forward, it has to be more powerful in cyberspace. It has to be more powerful in social media.
Yes.
It has to be more powerful on the internet than on the ground. It still has to provide some services on the ground.
Right.
But the people who are listening to radio and whose neighbors and children have Facebook and so on really are going to find that when JSB does or says something in social media, it's going to empower them. When JSB does or says something on Facebook that is well distributed across Jamaica, it empowers people who are blind and their relatives. So that social media is going to have to become one of the biggest drivers of how the Jamaica Society of the Blind does its thing. It's also going to have to be the biggest driver of fundraising. It's going to have to be the biggest driver of getting people's attention in a lot of ways. And so that this COVID virus thing has presented a lot of organizations with a wonderful opportunity to pivot into social media. The fact that you and I are doing this interview using Zoom, the fact that we don't now have to ask permission from some Brahmin at some big radio station.
That is true.
To say what we have to say, means that we have an extraordinary opportunity to say it and to get it done.
A word to our client and the members.
But we have to do it ourselves. I mean, an organization like JSB is a facilitator. It's not, JSB, there are no fewer than 20 or 25,000 people who are functionally blind in Jamaica. There's perhaps another 75,000 people who are low vision. There's no way that JSB can provide services for them. What JSB can do is get everybody who is providing services for everybody else to include the people who are blind and low vision in the delivery of those services. So the more JSB can get the banks to have accessible automated teller machines, more services delivered. The more JSB can get the health systems and health services to make it easier for people who are blind and disabled to get access to health services, including family planning services, the more JSB is delivering to people who are blind. The more JSB can create opportunities for people who are blind to get slots in the many markets across Jamaica, the many public markets that taxpayers pay for, the more JSB can get those markets to allocate slots, 1 or 2 slots in each of those markets for vendors who are blind and their families, JSB is delivering. So it's the key is to get those services that are being delivered for everybody else to be available to people who are blind and their relatives.
And the blind and visually impaired folks must also make sure that when they get into these organizations that they represent the JSB well.
Well, represent themselves, their families, and blind people well. JSB can take care of itself. They can. JSB is an institution. It has the power. It has its own megaphone. It can shout as loud as it wants. It can mobilize a demonstration in front of any ministry tomorrow morning and put maybe 20, 30, 40 blind people there. These individuals can't do that. But they must, when they get these opportunities, they must make sure they treat the opportunities very well so that the people around will be willing to allow more people who are blind to come in and share in the thing. I think, some of us have gone through jobs in different ministries, and we look back and we see that other blind persons were allowed to take those jobs once we left. That's what I'm talking about, to make sure that if I wasn't impressive at the office of the Prime Minister. Those who would have gone on as blind people after that would never have been allowed to.
Yes, yes. That is very true, sir. And with that word, we want to say thank you so very much, Mr. Grant, for a very enlightening interview today. Yes, folks, you are listening to the man himself.
And I just want to tell you that you've been wonderful. I enjoyed the way you remained on focus. You had your scheme of work planned, and regardless of what I babbled about, you came right back to your plan, and that's a good sign. Keep developing yourself.
Thank you very much, sir. Yes, folks, so there you have it. Another edition of the JSB Trail, a beacon from the past, lighting the future. And we really want to say thanks again to today's guest, Mr. Arvel Grant. It has been a very, very, very enlightening interview. And look out, folks, we have more interviews coming up where JSB Trails is concerned. So my name is Damion Rose, and for the final time today, I want to say thank you for listening and look out for more.
Thank you for listening to JSB Trails, a beacon from the past, lighting the future. This has been a production of the JSB Library.